March 1942. The Admiralty has a problem no bomb can solve. Germany's newest battleship, Tirpitz, displaces 52,600 tons at full load. She carries 8 15-inch guns in 4 twin turrets and a belt of 320 millimeters of armour. If she breaks into the Atlantic, the entire convoy system collapses. Her sister ship Bismarck had already proven what a single capital ship could do. It took 8 battleships, 2 carriers, 11 cruisers and 22 destroyers to hunt Bismarck down. Britain cannot afford that again. There is only one dry dock on the entire Atlantic coast of Europe, large enough to service Tirpitz. It sits at St. Nazaire, France. Destroy the dock, and Tirpitz cannot risk the Atlantic. The solution. Combined Operations proposes sounds like madness. Take a 23-year-old American destroyer that everyone agrees is worthless, pack her with 4.5 tons of hidden explosives, sail her into one of the most heavily defended ports in occupied France, and ram her into the dock gate. The men who volunteer are told most of them will not come back. Here is why this plan, which skeptics called a suicide mission, became the most celebrated Commando raid in British military history. The ship chosen for destruction was HMS Campbeltown. She began life as USS Buchanan, hull number DD-131, a Wickes-class destroyer built at Bath Iron Works in Maine. Launched on January 2, 1919, she displaced just 1,090 tons standard. Her 4 Norman boilers and 2 Parsons geared steam turbines produced 24,200 shaft horsepower for a design speed of 35 knots. By 1940 she was over 2 decades old, worn out, and headed for the scrapyard. She came to Britain through the Destroyers for Bases agreement signed on September 2, 1940. 50 aging American destroyers exchanged for 99-year leases on British bases across the Western Hemisphere. The Royal Navy called them Town-class destroyers. Sailors called them something worse. Both propellers turned the same direction, producing enormous turning circles. They were desperately wet in Atlantic conditions with narrow hulls that rolled violently. One Canadian officer compared them to the Trojan horse. Campbeltown's service record was a catalogue of collisions. She hit the steamer Rissoy during sea trials. She ran down and sank the coaster Fidown in the Mersey. She collided with the steamer Comus a month later. By January 1942, she was at Devonport for yet another overhaul, rated in poor condition and essentially worthless as a fighting ship. But worthless to the fleet was perfect for combined operations. She was large enough to carry tons of explosives. Her shallow draft could navigate the Loire estuary, and nobody would miss her. The precedent for British terror was written in blood. In May 1941, Bismarck had sortied into the Denmark Strait and sunk HMS Hood in roughly 10 minutes. 1,415 men died. 3 survived. Hunting Bismarck down consumed nearly the entire home fleet, and when Bismarck was crippled, she had been limping toward one port, St. Nazaire. Now her heavier sister sat in a Norwegian fjord, and Churchill himself stated that the whole strategy of the war turned on this one ship. Tirpitz did not even need to fight. As a fleet in being, she forced Britain to keep multiple battleships and carriers at Scapa Flow, ships desperately needed for convoy escort and Mediterranean operations. In July 1942, the mere rumour of a Tirpitz sortie caused the Admiralty to scatter convoy PQ-17. German aircraft and U-boats massacred the dispersed merchantmen. 24 of 33 ships sunk. Tirpitz never fired a shot. The strategic logic was absolute. Tirpitz at 52,600 tons needed a dock 350 metres long and 50 metres wide. The Normandie dock at St. Nazaire was exactly that. Built between 1929 and 1933 for the French superliner Normandie, it was the largest dry dock in the world. Destroy its gate, and no facility between Germany and the Atlantic could service a Bismarck-class battleship. Tirpitz would be trapped. The RAF had already tried. Bomber Command conducted 50 raids against St. Nazaire. They destroyed 85% of the town but never touched the dock. The 1941 Butt report had revealed the truth about bombing accuracy. Only 1 aircraft in 3 got within 5 miles of its target. Precision strikes on a single dock gate were impossible from the air. A commando raid was the only option. Captain Charles Lambay brought the concept to Lord Louis Mountbatten at Combined Operations Headquarters. Mountbatten approved it in 4 days. The Chiefs of Staff gave the green light on March 3, 1942. Commander Robert Ryder would lead the naval force. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman would command the Commandos. Over 9 days at Devonport, Campbeltown became something unprecedented, a ship designed to destroy itself. Workers cut 2 of her 4 funnels away and raked the remaining 2 backward to mimic a German torpedo boat silhouette. They stripped her main guns, all 12 torpedo tubes, and every depth charge. In their place went 1 12-pounder gun forward, 8 20mm Oerlikon cannon, and 2.50 caliber Browning machine guns. The bridge was encased in steel plate with only vision slits. Armour plating 2 feet high lined the deck to protect commandos lying flat during the approach. The critical modification was invisible. 24 Mark 7 depth charges containing 4.5 short tons of Amatil high explosive were built into a steel and concrete structure behind the forward gun. 6 cells, separated by concrete walls, sealed under a steel lid, wired with multiple 8-hour acid delay fuses, then cemented over so thoroughly that German inspectors would later search the ship and find nothing. Her draft was reduced to 9 feet for the shallow estuary. Only enough fuel for a one-way trip was loaded. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Beatty took command with a crew of 75. The total force numbered 612 men, 346 Royal Navy personnel, and 265 commandos drawn from No. 2 Commando and specialist demolition teams from 6 other commando units. They sailed in Campbeltown, 16 Fairmile B motor launches, motor gun boat 314 as the headquarters vessel, and motor torpedo boat 74 carrying delayed action torpedoes as a backup weapon. 2 Hunt-class escort destroyers accompanied them for the outward voyage. If you're finding this deep dive into Royal Navy innovation worth your time, subscribing takes a second and supports the channel. At 1400 hours on March 26, 1942, the flotilla sailed from Falmouth. They headed southwest at 10 knots, mimicking an anti-submarine patrol bound for Gibraltar. A German U-boat spotted them but reported an incorrect heading, sending 6 German torpedo boats racing the wrong direction. At 2200 on March 27th, the escorts peeled off. The attack force adopted assault formation. Campbeltown hoisted the German naval ensign. At 0030 on March 28th, the convoy entered the Loire estuary. Campbeltown scraped bottom twice on the sandbanks, but pulled free each time. A diversionary RAF bombing raid had backfired. Cloud cover meant only 4 bombers found targets. The unusual pattern of single bomb drops raised German suspicions instead of calming them. The harbour commander ordered heightened alert. At 0122, searchlights snapped on from both banks. A German signal lamp demanded identification. Leading signalman Pike on the headquarters boat replied with captured German recognition codes obtained during the Vagso raid 3 months earlier. When a shore battery fired, Campbeltown signalled that she was being engaged by friendly forces. The bluff bought 6 minutes. 6 minutes to close the remaining distance. At 0128, 1 mile from the target, the deception collapsed. Beatty ordered the German ensign struck and the white ensign raised. Every German gun in the harbour opened fire simultaneously. Campbeltown's forward 12-pounder was knocked out. The helmsman was killed. His replacement was wounded. Beatty pushed to 19 knots. Her 8 Oerlikons blazed back into the searchlights. Tracer and shell fire turned the estuary into a corridor of fire. At 0134 on March 28, 1942, HMS Campbeltown smashed through the anti-torpedo netting and rammed the southern gate of the Normandie dock at 19 to 20 knots. The impact drove her bow 10 metres onto the caisson. The hidden charges were in perfect position. Beatty turned to his captain and said calmly that they had arrived. 4 minutes late. Commandos poured off the wrecked destroyer and attacked their targets. Lieutenant Stuart Chant's team descended 40 feet underground and demolished the main pump house, the irreplaceable machinery controlling the dock's water levels. Lieutenant Corin Purden destroyed the northern pump station. Lieutenant Chris Smalley wrecked the southern winding house. Every primary demolition objective from the Campbeltown group was achieved within minutes. The motor launches suffered catastrophically. Their wooden hulls and exposed 500-gallon petrol tanks made them floating bombs under German fire. Motor launch 268 took a direct hit in her fuel tanks and exploded. 1 man survived. Of 18 small craft that sailed from Falmouth, 13 motor launches were lost. Only 4 launches and the headquarters boat returned to England. On motor launch 306, unable to land at the Old Mole, Sergeant Thomas Durrant of No. 1 Commando manned the Lewis gun in a completely exposed position. When the German torpedo boat Jaguar attacked at 50 yards range, her commander called twice for surrender. Durrant answered both times with a long burst of fire. Hit 16 times across his body, he could only stay upright by gripping the gun mounting. He died the following day. His Victoria Cross was recommended by the Jaguar's own captain, one of the rarest gestures in the history of warfare. Ashore, roughly 100 commandos were cut off with no evacuation route. Newman gathered his men. He told them to fight until ammunition ran out, then do their best to reach England overland. They charged through the streets of Saint-Nazaire in close quarters, combat until dawn. 5 men eventually escaped through France to Spain and reached England via Gibraltar. Through the morning, the wreck of Campbeltown became a German sightseeing attraction. Officers and soldiers climbed aboard for photographs. Inspection parties searched the ship and found nothing suspicious. At approximately noon on March 28th, roughly 10.5 hours after impact, the 4.5 tons of amytol detonated. The blast obliterated the forward half of the destroyer and completely destroyed the 160-ton dock gate. Seawater flooded the empty dock. Approximately 250 German soldiers and officials on or near the ship were killed instantly, including a party of 40 senior officers. Lieutenant Commander Beatty was under interrogation when the explosion shook the building. His German interrogator had been mocking the futility of the attack. Beatty smiled. 2 days later, the delayed action torpedoes from motor torpedo boat 7-4 detonated at the old entrance lock gates. The Germans panicked. Their own workers in khaki were mistaken for British commandos and shot. The harbour was closed for a week. The cost was severe. Of 612 men, 169 were killed and 215 captured. But the Normandie dock was rendered completely inoperable. The Germans never used it again. It was not repaired until 1948. The operation produced 5 Victoria Crosses, the highest number for any single action in World War II. Commander Ryder for remaining under fire to verify the mission. Lieutenant Colonel Newman for leading 5 hours of ground combat, then the fighting withdrawal. Lieutenant Commander Beatty for driving Campbeltown into the dock gate under withering fire. Sergeant Thomas Durrant, awarded posthumously after his Victoria Cross was recommended by the German commander who watched him fight. And able seaman William Savage, killed by the last German salvo 4 miles offshore, still manning his gun. Tirpitz never entered the Atlantic. She remained in Norwegian fjords for the rest of the war. On November 12, 1944, RAF Lancasters hit her with 12,000-pound tallboy bombs near Tromsø. She capsized, entombing roughly 1,000 crew. The dock that might have sheltered her after an Atlantic sortie was still a ruin. The German reaction to Saint-Nazaire was immediate and far-reaching. Hitler was furious that a British flotilla had sailed up the Loire unchallenged. He sacked the Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief West. By June 1942, Germans began fortifying coastal gun emplacements with concrete in quantities previously reserved for U-boat pens. Hitler ordered the construction of 15,000 bunkers along the Atlantic coast from Norway to Spain. The raid, combined with the Bruneval raid a month earlier, became a direct catalyst for what the world would know as the Atlantic Wall. Compare this to Dieppe 5 months later. The success of Saint-Nazaire encouraged combined operations to attempt an even bolder venture. It proved a disaster. Of roughly 6,000 troops, nearly 4,000 were killed or captured. Dieppe earned 1 Victoria Cross. Saint-Nazaire earned 5. The difference was precision. Saint-Nazaire targeted a single, irreplaceable structure with a purpose-built weapon. Dieppe attempted a frontal port assault with conventional forces against prepared defences. British innovation and unconventional thinking succeeded where brute force failed. A 23-year-old destroyer that everyone agreed was expendable sailed into one of the most defended harbours in occupied Europe and achieved a strategic objective that 50 bombing raids could not. 612 men volunteered for what they knew was likely a one-way trip. The dock gate they destroyed was not repaired for 6 years. The battleship they denied the Atlantic never fired a shot in anger against a convoy. 5 Victoria Crosses from a single night's action. One recommended by the enemy. The Normandie dock still stands at Saint-Nazaire. It still works. The ship that broke it was called Worthless. The men who sailed her proved otherwise.